Hi guys, welcome back to Econ Time with SK. So grab your notebooks, your favorite cup of coffee, and let's get started.
In this chapter, we are going to ultimately derive the different short-run cost curves. But first, in this very video, we shall be focusing on deriving the law of diminishing marginal product. First, we are going to look at concepts of fixed versus variable input. Specifically, when we talk about fixed input, we are talking about inputs that remain the same whether you increase production or not. On the other hand, when we are talking about variable inputs, these are inputs that are going to change as you produce more and more. Similarly, if you were to reduce production, then this input would also be falling. To better understand this, let's actually look at an example. So here we are looking at an example about Rahim's Carpenters, and we see that this company produces bookshelves. And we're being told that to produce these bookshelves, the company actually leases a workshop for a year at like 30,000 taka per month. And suddenly they get a bulk order. So they have to increase bookshelf production. And in order to do so, they actually go out and they hire more employees, such as carpenters, accountants, assistants, etc. And when they're doing this, they of course have to increase how much raw material they're using, such as wood, paint, nail, and so on and so forth. So the question we're being asked is, what is Rahim Carpenter's fixed input and what's their variable input? So in this case, remember, fixed input means it does not change if you were to vary production. So whether Rahim Carpenter is producing 0 bookshelves, 100 bookshelves, 300 bookshelves, they need that factory space, right? And they have paid rent for a year, so they have to continue paying this rent. So this is their fixed input. The factory space, essentially land, is their fixed input because it doesn't vary with the number of bookshelves that they have to produce. On the other hand, remember, variable inputs are those which vary with how much you produce. So when they get this bulk order, they have to, of course, hire more labor, get more wood, get more paint, nails, etc., etc. So these are all examples of variable input. Two related concepts that are very important is in production, what do we mean by short run versus long run? Well, when any of the input is fixed, then the firm is said to be producing in the short run. So in the example that we saw with Rahim's Carpenters, because they had to continue paying rent on their workshop, so land was essentially a fixed input, which means with Rahim's Carpenter, we were actually discussing the short run. On the other hand, the long run is when all of the factors of production can be changed. So for instance, let's say that Rahim Carpenter is in a situation where it can renegotiate its contract, it can get a new workshop, and it can also hire new workers, get new raw material. That is a situation where we would be saying that Rahim Carpenters is operating in the long run. So going forward, when we study the law of diminishing marginal productivity, you will see that this law essentially is about the short run. Why? Because soon you will see that we are talking about only varying one of the factors of production, that is labor, while capital and land is kept constant in the particular example that we're going to be looking at. So the law of diminishing marginal product is always a short run concept because some of the inputs are kept fixed.
Okay, so basically, my focus in this video is going to be just going over the law of diminishing marginal product. So now let's just dive right in. Remember, the factors of production are land, labor, capital. An entrepreneur is the guy who brings everything together. So basically, what we're saying here is, well, the capital and the land, that is fixed. So the only thing that is changing is labor here. So that is a variable input. And you can see in this table, what we're showing is we're hiring more and more and more labor up to 10 units. And then what the total product essentially shows is this is just the quantity, total quantity that is being produced. And we see that that amount is actually increasing all the way through. So total product is increasing. And then what do we see about the marginal product? So the marginal product is interesting, right? Because we see that up to the third unit of labor that is hired, MP actually increases. And then after that, the MP actually falls, and at one point actually starts becoming negative. So let's go over that a bit more in detail, okay? So first question is, why is total product equal to zero when the variable input, that is labor, is equal to zero? Well, the answer to that is simple, because if you don't hire any labor, then you're not going to have any production, right? Because you've got the land, you've got the capital, but who's going to be using it? So you need the labor, right? So no labor, no production. So that is why your total product is zero. After that, let's actually focus on this trend, all right? Why is it? So essentially what we are saying is that if I were to graph this, with marginal product here and labor here, what we're seeing is that, hey, you know what? Up to, let's say, 3 units, we've got MP rising, and then it actually falls. So this is what your marginal product curve looks like. Basically, we're seeing after 3 units of labor, marginal product is diminishing. So the question is why? The main reason why marginal products is diminishing is because we are combining more and more labor with fixed amount of land and capital. And so what really is happening is that, remember I gave that example in class that if you've got 4 computers in a lab, so this is your fixed input, right? This is your fixed capital. And also you've got 1 lab, right? So that's your, basically we are saying that your land is also fixed. And so you've got 1 lab and 4 computers, and initially, let's say as you are hiring, initially you hire, let's say, 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4, then it's all good, right? Because, of course, when you have one guy, you're underutilizing your resources. So when you add the second guy, that increases each person's productivity, right? So each person actually now um, is contributing more, all right? And of course, because they can do group work, they can have discussion, so they move faster. You add the third guy, there's sufficient number of capital around, and then they can, again, there is benefit from being able to discuss the problems, and so they move faster, right? Same story with the fourth guy. But once you start adding more and more, so let's say, you add the fifth guy and then the sixth guy. When you're adding the fifth and the sixth and the seventh and the eighth, what is the problem? Now, there's actually, they have to share the computers, right? If they have to share the computers, that means each person has less time with each computer. So they have less time in which they can work. And so that of course means that when there's all of the sharing going on, because they have to use this limited amount of capital among themselves, each person's productivity actually falls. So each person can now contribute less because of having to share the limited computers, all right, the fixed computers. And then if you were to add more and more and more, so let's say, add a ninth guy, a 10th guy. If you're doing that, what's happening is now you've got this, they basically, you've put them in a situation where they're sort of fighting over the computers. And of course, when they're fighting over this limited resources, again, each person's contribution goes down even more. So that really is what is being captured by this diminishing marginal product. As you are adding this new labor, but you've kept your capital and land fixed, then there's basically they're having to share resources, they have to fight for these limited fixed inputs, and what that means is that each person now is less productive, so each person's contribution is actually less. So when you are reading this table, do not make the mistake of thinking that, hey, you know what, when I add the fifth guy, then the fifth guy produces 18 units. What we're really saying is when I'm adding the fifth guy, all of them now, their contribution is less.
So the way that we should be interpreting this table is that when the fifth guy is added, then contribution to the total product is 18 units. Similarly, when the sixth guy is added, the contribution of all of these labor that is hired is 17 units. So the main reason that there's diminishing marginal product is because more and more of the variable input, in this case labor, is being added to fixed amount of other inputs, in this case land, capital, etc. So as more and more of this variable input is added to fixed inputs, because there's now this fight for limited resources, that is why as you add more guys, the overall contribution to the total product keeps on falling, which is what we see as diminishing marginal product.
So in the next video, we are going to look at the graphical analysis, specifically how we can represent the law of diminishing marginal product graphically. All right, guys, I shall see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.